But you can sort of see where the Jews are coming from on this, because it makes it sound like when God establishes his kingdom, everything's going to be great. And whilst I'm generally very optimistic and positive on life, it'd be difficult to argue that everything's great. And this, if this was forever, it'd be a bit, oh, really? Is that the best we can do? Today we're on to the book of Daniel, who was another prophet in the Old Testament. And today I've read chapters 1 and 2 so that you do not have to. This then is my summary of it. It's a bit confusing, this, in terms of dates, because it talks about Daniel having been... It's all set about 600 BC, but it sounds like it was written more like 200 BC. So any sort of predictions of Babylonian exiles, that sort of thing, or actually it takes place during the Babylonian exile, but talk of Persia and later things, got to ask some questions about whether that's valid or not. But this was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, so we do know that this was definitely written before Jesus came along. So anything that relates to sort of Jesus-ness, which some of this does seem to hint to that, we know was definitely written before that. We open with King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon decides he's going to pick Daniel and 3 of his friends to come along and be sort of special Babylonian people. He's going to train them in the ways of the Babylonian language and literature and that sort of thing, and then make them sort of counselors, as it were. It does seem, slightly suspiciously, that Daniel is chosen because he's handsome and clever, but then he did write this, so I guess he would say that, wouldn't he? Nebuchadnezzar anyway gives them, Daniel and his 3 friends, new names, and these new names are Belteshazzar for Daniel, and then his 3 friends become Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Catchy. And it sounds like these 3 or 4 are supposed to be being treated well. It says they're given food from the king's table. For some reason, though, Daniel picks up on this and he feels it defiles them somehow. So he's reluctant to do it and decides to turn vegetarian for 10 days. Seems like a terrible punishment. It does seem that after these 10 days, they look healthier than the other people who have been eating from the king's table. So nothing more is said about it, but it does seem that the chef was bad or something, or the meat was off, something like that. Don't know. It then says that Daniel and his 3 chaps, they go into some sort of training for 3 years of all this stuff ready for it, and then come back as these counsellors to Nebuchadnezzar. It also adds that God is with these 4 men and makes them super clever, and Nebuchadnezzar seems to acknowledge this, saying that they're 10 times more clever than his enchanters and magicians throughout his entire kingdom. I suspect that may have something to do with the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, magic does not exist. Therefore, it would make sense that they could be wiser and cleverer than magicians. So, yeah, bit weird. We then have a bit of time screwiness because it talks about in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, bearing in mind Daniel and that lot have been training for 3 years before they come to work. Not sure. It says Nebuchadnezzar has a weird dream and he goes to his normal counsel-y type people and says, I want you to interpret this dream for me. Okay, fine, all good. But it comes with a bit of a twist. He says if they get it right, then lots of great things are going to happen and, happy days. But if they get it wrong, he's going to chop them up and then knock their houses down. Not sure it necessarily matters to have your house knocked down if you've already been chopped up, but I suppose families being inconvenienced, that sort of thing. There is, of course, always an odd bit. And the odd bit here is it sounds like Nebuchadnezzar is not even going to tell them what the dream is and they just have to interpret it, which, without knowing what it is, which doesn't seem very fair. They understandably turn around to Nebuchadnezzar and say, well, that's impossible. We can't do that. That's crazy. So he kills them and then kills all the wise people in the whole of Babylon. It seems a little bit extreme. It doesn't say a lot for Nebuchadnezzar, does it? Apparently Daniel and his chums are supposed to be killed as part of this, but Daniel says, no, it's fine. I can interpret it. It's all good. And it seems the terms somewhat change in that, from what I gather, Nebuchadnezzar does tell Daniel what his dream is, which is a bit of an acid trip. But basically, it takes the form of... There's some statue in his dream, and it's made of several different materials, including gold, silver, iron, bronze, and clay. And then some rock that's not cut by man, don't know how they know that, hits this statue and wipes it away, seemingly progressively. So it's a bit of an odd one. Daniel then interprets this as there's going to be 4 kingdoms, the different levels of material, as it were, and God's going to come along, smash it away and take over. So it talks about there's going to be 4 different kingdoms, as it were, and then during the 4th one, God is going to set up his kingdom that's then going to endure and last forever. it seems that we can put this down to being the first one being Babylon, second one being Persia, then Greece, then the Roman Empire. So there's your four. And this is obviously definitely before, I think it's got to be before Greece, the 2nd century, isn't it? I think it's definitely before the Romans. So that seems to allude to stuff coming, but it's not specifying it's the Romans or anything like that, obviously. And obviously Jesus comes along during the Roman bit and in theory establishes God's kingdom that endures forever. But you can sort of see where the Jews are coming from on this, because it makes it sound like when God establishes his kingdom, everything's going to be great. And whilst I'm generally very optimistic and positive on life, it'd be difficult to argue that everything's great. And this, if this was forever, it'd be a bit, oh, really? Is that the best we can do? So, yeah, a difficult one. And you've got to say the Jews would seem to be reasonable to say that this is not fulfilled, because it doesn't sound like it's going to be fulfilled. Whereas the Christians presumably would say it is fulfilled because God's kingdom is here, because Jesus has died on the cross and all is good. But it's not good, obviously. So, yeah, not sure. Quite a strong start to Daniel there, I think, anyway. So, interesting. I do recall from Daniel there's talk about this lion's den thing, so we'll come on to that at some point soon, hopefully. And yeah, on we will go to the next one.